With the hope that still some more people will join, we welcome you at the webinar about climate change on a very special day, the Earth Day. My name is Justyna Janiszewska, and I'm greeting you on behalf of the Polish-US Fulbright Commission. A co-organizer of today's event is American Corner Gdańsk, our many years and great partner. And it is my pleasure to welcome Martyna Skórska and Weronika Edward. I hope that they are here with us. We're meeting as a part of our celebrations of 75th anniversary of the Fulbright program globally. The world has changed significantly throughout those 3/4 of a century, and the Fulbright program is changing with the world and is changing the world. I hope so. And this is why we'll be discussing a key contemporary issue of climate change. Let me welcome our speakers very briefly, because the moderator of today's meeting will tell more about them in a few minutes. Professor Małgorzata Grodzińska-Jurczak, Head of Nature Protection, Wildlife Management and Environmental Protection Research Team at the Institute of Environmental Sciences, Jagiellonian University, Kraków, Poland, and Professor Grodzińska-Jurczak is Fulbright alumna. Professor Lora Harris, an associate professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, United States, future Fulbrighter to Finland. Professor Francisco Ferreira, associate professor at the Department of Environmental Sciences and Engineering of the Nova School of Science and Technology in Lisbon, Portugal, Fulbright alumnus. All of our speakers have great academic careers, but their activities go far beyond academia, and I'm sure we'll hear about that today. A moderator of today's event will be Adam Wincukiewicz, PhD candidate in physics at the University of Warsaw. He's also a coordinator of Solve Climate by 2030 campaign for Poland. He's involved internationally in policy making regarding clean energy and climate change, and his research is recognized as absolutely promising and leading to high impact solutions in reducing CO2 emissions. And here's also a surprising fact, to me surprising fact about Adam, that he's a big fan of Formula One. Surprising because to me Formula One is all about air pollution and noise. But certainly it will come as no surprise to you that Adam is a future Fulbrighter from Poland to the United States. 2 housekeeping informations. This meeting is recorded, so if you don't wish that your face is shown somewhere at the recording, please keep your camera off. Otherwise, we'll be happy to see your face. And when you're not speaking, please keep your mic muted. There will be time for questions, and I leave it up to Adam to decide if they will be put on the chat or through your microphones. Thank you very much, and to you, Adam.
Okay, thank you. So maybe at the very beginning, a little bit of explanation about Formula One. It's, actually all about technology, and some of the solutions from Formula One we already have in our lives, like hybrid engines or kinetic energy recovery system in cars. So it's obvious a transfer of technologies. So this is about the F1. However, I'd like to thank you for the invitation and giving me this opportunity to be a moderator of our today's meeting. And together with our panelists, we agreed that I'll start with a very short presentation about climate change and the mechanism of this phenomenon. So let me show you this presentation. So as you see, I refer here to climate change as a climate emergency, because I think that it says much more than climate change, because climate change only doesn't say anything, says anything about the necessity to act, to change our behavior. And so why do we need to act actually? So right here you can see the chart which shows the temperature anomaly over time, and as you see, this temperature has been growing since the Industrial Revolution, and right now we are very close to a threshold beyond which some irreversible changes on the planet will occur. And if probably heard that one of the perpetrators of this situation is CO2, and that's somehow true. So as you see here, I'm showing you the global CO2 emissions, how they changed over years. And right now we add about 35 gigatons, which is billion of tons of carbon dioxide every single year. And it's only CO2. If we count all of the greenhouse gases, it's even more. It's about 50 billion tons emitted by humans every single year. But what do we need to do with that? I mean, if you see this graph, you see the obvious correlation between CO2 concentration within the atmosphere and the temperature. So it's actually like a perfect match between those two variables. So now I'd like to show you how it works actually, and what's the mechanism of this correlation. So as you know, in the solar system, we have a huge source of energy, the sun, and sunlight reaches the Earth and the planet warms up. But obviously, our planet doesn't hold all this energy forever, right? Because if it did, it would be already incredibly hot. So instead, the Earth radiates back some of this energy towards space, right? And now we can consider three cases. And the first one says that planet's temperature remains the same when the amount of energy going in is exactly the same as the amount of energy going out. So you can imagine a container with water, filled with water, and say the water has 50 Celsius degree. And if you have a heater below, you can precisely adjust the power of the heater in such a way that it will have this temperature of 50 Celsius degree all the time. So you'll create some kind of equilibrium then. So this is the first case. The second one says that planet's temperature decreases when the amount of energy going in is smaller than the going out. So using this example of container with water, you can reduce the heater, and then radiation from the top will be more effective, will be faster than new energy which you provide from the bottom. And the first scenario says that planet's temperature increases when the amount of energy going from the sun is greater than going out. So this is the case when you increase the power of the heater, and then it leads to increase of the temperature of the water, finally leading to even boiling, for instance. So this is the case when more energy is delivered by the sun than it's able to leave our planet. And we are exactly here. So now I'd like to ask the question, why and what stops the heat to go out towards space? Well, and the next question, what makes the Earth habitable actually? Especially when you take a look on those two astronomical objects. They are very close to each other and they receive more or less the same amount of energy because their distance from the sun is more or less the same. However, conditions on both objects are significantly different, right? And the reason of that is the atmosphere. And now you may recall to physics class, maybe remember that all molecules vibrate, and the faster they vibrate, the hotter they are. And this is the temperature actually, right? So this is the average so-called thermal energy of the system. So if molecules move very fast, they are hot. If they move slower, or even eventually they are almost frozen, their temperature is slower. And atmosphere consists of molecules, of gases like oxygen, like nitrogen. And there is also a small fraction of gases, so-called greenhouse gases. And they are responsible for so-called greenhouse effect. And actually without them, the average temperature on Earth's surface would be about -18 Celsius degree, rather than the present average of 15. So you see that actually we need them, we need greenhouse gases. However, we destroyed this natural equilibrium by adding a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and nature is not able to capture this carbon dioxide. And And this is the reason. So how it works when the planet wants to cool down, I mean, the Earth radiates back some of this energy. Some of this energy is emitted in just the right range of wavelengths to get absorbed by greenhouse gases. So they absorb this energy, they move faster, and they are hotter. And this is and as a consequence, the average temperature increases. So to sum up this part, first of all, atmosphere matters. Secondly, molecules vibrate, and the faster they vibrate, the hotter they are. Next, greenhouse gases absorb the energy radiated by the Earth, and greenhouse gases warm up the planet. However, we destroyed the natural equilibrium. Right now, the concentration of greenhouse gases is so high, and as a consequence, the temperature increases. And briefly speaking, there is more than carbon dioxide, obviously. So they also called greenhouse gases. And right now, I hope you see why they're also called heat-trapping gases, right? And we are mostly focused on carbon dioxide because this gas remains in the atmosphere for a very long time. And this is actually the main problem. By burning fossil fuels today, we deliver a carbon dioxide which will stay in the atmosphere for generations. And it's not that easy to get rid of it, to capture this carbon dioxide. Okay, so I hope that now it's maybe more clear what's the correlation between concentration of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases within the atmosphere and the increase in global annual temperatures. I just wanted to briefly show you this. It's greenhouse gases emissions by sector. And I just wanted to say that virtually every activity in modern life, like growing things, making things, moving around from place to place, like producing electricity, involves releasing greenhouse gases. And we need to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So we have to reduce our emissions by 100%. And if we don't, we will have it will be a disaster actually for both humans, but also for the entire life on the planet. And I wanted to show you just several examples of so-called cost of carbon that probably our panelists will say something more about the effects of climate change, looking from their perspective. So here, I think that it's a good time to go to our next part of the discussion. So yes, so let me close this presentation. Thank you. And I'd like to welcome Professor Ferreira, Professor Grodzińska-Jurczak, and Professor Harris once again. Okay. And we prepared few questions for you. So let me launch the first poll. I don't know if you can see it, but if yes, please answer. Okay, just wait a little bit. Okay, and pool and share results. Can you see the results? Okay, perfect. So it seems that we have few students, interested citizens, scientists, perfect. I'd like to start with a very general entry, let's say, question to our guests. So, sorry, I have to close this poll. So what do you do as a scientist? Maybe let's start with Professor Grodzińska-Jurczak, please. We can hear you. Unmute, please.
Could you stop sharing? Because I see the polling num identification. I would rather see your face. But anyhow, yeah, that's okay. Okay, my name is Małgorzata or Margaret Grodzińska-Jurczak, and I'm a biologist by profession. I'm a professor of biology, but this is only because of legislation in Poland that if you started with biology, your scientific career, you have to become biologist at the end of the story, which is a professor. I'm much more with social sciences at the moment, and the object of my expertise, let's say, is the people, and the surrounding is the nature and the environment. So to make the long story short, I'm very much interested in social aspect of nature conservation and environmental conservation. And this is, as far as the academia, I'm also very much out of the university. I'm fascinated by popularization, which is science communication. And this is treated by me as a kind of our call, let's say, our academia, that we have to talk to people, no matter what age, no matter what education level, just to popularize what we are studying. And one last but not least, somehow my interest was, well, even powered or supported by the Fulbright, because I had a chance to be at Colorado State University like 8 years ago at Fulbright, dealing with human dimension of natural resources. So this is like a cradle of that social human aspect of nature conservation, which I started to try to implement here in Europe. Thanks.
Thank you. Professor Harris.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for inviting me to be on the panel. So as a scientist, I'm trained as an oceanographer, but I identify as a coastal ecologist. And a lot of my work is focused on understanding how to restore polluted coastal waters and estuaries, and also to deal with coastal hazards, in particular related to sea level rise in tidal wetlands. And I don't consider myself a climate scientist, but I think it's telling that I'm on the panel for this, because climate change impacts so much of what we do as environmental scientists, regardless of the problem that we work on. And so that's really a lot of what I try to do, is to help provide insights and to serve as an honest broker to communities, state agencies, and federal agencies in the United States around restoration, while also keeping an eye on other impacts that are not necessarily related to the direct policy of water pollution, like climate change. And it's so great to see so many students and teachers here. I do a lot of work in education. Part of my work is also focused on diversifying our geoscience workforce in the United States. And so that's, it's definitely up to students to help find solutions as well. So really welcome to all of you in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. And Professor Ferreira.
So good afternoon, good evening, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I do appreciate the invitation. Now, as a scientist, what am I? How involved in climate? My background is environmental engineering, and what I mostly do, and I think it's important when we talk about climate change, also to look at these two large areas. We talk about mitigation, basically reducing emissions, greenhouse gases emissions. And we talk about adaptation, because climate change is happening, and we need to adapt our lands, our activities, our territory to this changing climate. So basically, I work mostly on mitigation measures, on trying to find what are their impacts, how important they are for from municipalities to the national and international level, and in particularly the university collaborated technically with the so-called carbon neutrality roadmap for 2050 for Portugal. So that was an opportunity where I was deeply involved, particularly in the transport sector, to look at carbon neutrality within the next 30 years.
Okay, thank you very much. And I also wanted to add that we really encourage you to ask questions because we want to make this meeting as interactive as it can be, and just use this opportunity that you can talk with experts about climate. So if you have anything to say or to ask, just don't hesitate and ask us using the chat. And to initiate this connection, say, between the attendees and our panelists, we prepared 3 more questions for you, and I will launch them one after the other, and then we'll discuss about the results and about those questions. So let me start the next poll. So are you aware of possible consequences of sea level rise? Perfect. Okay, let's go to the next one. So how motivated are you to be an activist around climate change issues? I don't know if you can see the results like right now, or I have to share it. You see what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect.
You have to end the poll and then share the results, because only the co-hosts can see it.
Okay. So maybe even better. Okay. Okay, so I end this poll, and the very last one. Has the awareness of climate threat changed over pandemic? Okay, so okay, perfect. So let's start with sorry, stop sharing. I didn't want to show this one. Sea level rise. I'd like to start from Professor Harris. Professor, could you share with us your thoughts and generally what are the consequences of sea level rise for both humans but also for biodiversity? Could you tell us a little bit about this?
Great. So Adam was being very kind to ask a question he knew matched my expertise around sea level rise. And I think this question is also just asking us to think about the consequences of climate change in general. And one of the things that I've learned in my work is that the impacts of climate change in some sense for the public citizenry can feel existential, as if they're happening at some larger scale that's not directly impacting you. but I'll say that working with environmental managers, that's not the case at all. That we are already seeing many of the impacts of climate change in terms of persistent, what we call daylight flooding. So kind of flooding that just happens on a tidal schedule around the Chesapeake Bay, for example, the largest estuary in the United States. The greater frequency of storms, and the resulting impact that has on coastal regions. Specific to sea level rise, I did a little homework before I came, and here in Maryland, in the Chesapeake Bay, we're at a hot spot for sea level rise, but actually Poland is as well. And so Poland has the potential to have 1 million people impacted by persistent flooding over the next 50 to 100 years. And so, you know, there will be direct consequences of that on communities as well. And so, you know, I really welcome your questions in the chat about this. It would be great to hear from you questions, but also comments about, you know, how you see this impacting you personally. I think from the environmental management side, one of the challenges I've seen is that in the United States, we have policies like the Clean Water Act that was actually signed into law by President Nixon. He vetoed it initially, but then he had to sign it. And this is the law that we have to help govern water pollution. And that law was never written in the late 1960s around climate change, but it's the tool we have to govern pollution. And so one of the tricky problems we have in implementing that law is that we're now overlaying all of the restoration we're attempting on top of changed water temperatures and changed circulation of the water. The water even moves differently in estuaries now because of changes in the climate. So that's kind of a lot to say into the void on this topic, but I hope it maybe prompts you all to think of questions and comments, and I'd love to see them in the chat as we move to the next question or panelist. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's take a look on results of the second question. So how motivated are you to be an activist around climate change issues? And maybe you, Professor Ferreira, could share us your thoughts about both results, but also about activism in general. Do you think that there is any, I don't know, specific requirements or, I don't know, superpowers like a professorship or something like that, or maybe anyone can be an activist? How does it work?
Thank you, Adam. First of all, I should tell you that indeed I do a lot of research work, but in my free time, pardon, in my free time, I'm the president of the most active environmental NGO in Portugal, and I've been involved in the NGO movement for a long time. So in my voluntary work, I do dedicate for a long time to have an activity considering nature conservation and also now climate change. I think that, you know, all of us really need to be activists. And when I say activists, I mean on our daily lives. Climate change is really the most challenging problem that we have to face during the next decades. Today, I had the opportunity to listen to the Leaders Climate Summit that is being broadcast from the US, that was promoted by President Joe Biden, with a lot of leaders, starting with the UN Secretary General, and it's really impressive. The data that we have, it's you know, the temperature already raised 1.2 degrees Celsius. That's the information from this week from the World Meteorological Organization. And the Paris Agreement that tries to tackle climate change, the goal is not to go beyond 1.5 degrees. So I think that we really need to be motivated to get involved in an environmental NGO, but the most important thing is for you to do your job at home, the way you move from one place to the other, the selection that you do for your food, you know, and not only in terms of the climate, but also in terms of sustainability. It's very important for all of us to get informed, to make the best choices in order to save the planet. All of us do have a responsibility, from the individuals to the municipalities, to the national level, to worldwide. So I was expecting, you know, that we would have 100% of extremely motivated people, but I believe that here the activist is more connected with someone that you know, that goes to a demonstration, that is more active publicly. But I would like to really ask you to become activists in different forms all day, every day.
Thank you. Maybe, you know, the word which I used here, extremely, is not the best. It's like, you know, maybe too extreme, I don't know, but let's leave this answer, and maybe let's go to the final question. So, has the awareness of climate threat changed over pandemic? And Professor Grodzińska-Jurczak, could you comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'm sorry because I'm active at chatting. It doesn't mean that I was bored by the other panelists and you, Adam, but I like kicking students in a way, because interaction for me, it's like, let's say, the way we teach, the way I think we should teach. Anyhow, that's I just chatted you a bit. What I wanted to say about changing our behavior or perception or attitudes about the climate change or climate threat over the pandemic, I can say only a few words about COVID-19 pandemic. At the moment, yes, we cannot say that it had changed our perception, but it has been changing. It is still changing. Why is that? And it is actually more like fluctuation. We've done some research over the last year, starting from the very beginning of the pandemic here in Europe, sometime in March. I'm focusing on single-use plastic effects on the climate threat from the social point of view. So what is people perspective? What is public perspective about the single-use plastic towards the environmental threat? So let's put like that we came to the point sometime more than a year ago that maybe not majority, but a big proportion of population all over the world started to become aware of the environment and starts to act, let's say, more or less environmentally friendly. Coming from the very bottom-up initiatives, Francisco said we're talking about activism. I like more bottom-up activities or whatever, like, for example, having coffee to go with multiple use cups. Very small examples of behavior, but still. So at the very beginning of, like, for 2 months from the beginning of the pandemic, it definitely collapsed. The hierarchy of the importance of climate threat completely changed couldn't, let's say, bet more with the threat of their health or even sometimes life. So people started quite immediately to use single-use plastic because of the healthy reasons. In some countries, legislation wasn't that friendly, let's say, to excuse the single-use, to have single-use plastic, but people do it for safety reasons. And it took like at least 2 to 3 months. Then slowly but steadily, people, and the same was exactly with media, that they even announced that it has to be like all the hygienic circumstances requirements say. So people somehow were forced to the extreme angle from the previous pandemic behavior. And then in the next probably half of the year, people slowly but steadily became actually to the behaviors we used to have before the pandemic. But it, as far as I know from our studies and from the American and European studies, we haven't reached the level of our awareness towards environment yet. Who knows how it will be proceeding? We changed, our behavior changed, our threat changed. So, you know, of course, the pollution of the environment is now different than it used to be, mainly also because of less transport, blah, blah, but still our behavior, that's what we had at the back of our head. From my point of view, our study point of view is quite crucial. We think differently, which doesn't mean that badly, but differently. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may comment on that, I checked that during pandemic and actually in 2020, we reduced carbon dioxide emissions by about 6%. And it's not that much, to be honest. And from my point of view, it showed me how hard it will be to get to carbon neutrality, right? Because you consider what it took to reduce our emissions by 6%, right? Our lives were changed completely, right? We've been living in lockdowns for more than a year. Social life actually doesn't exist. 2 million people died. Tens of millions lost their jobs, and actually, you know, and we reduced only by 6%. And as I said during my presentation, we need to reduce our emissions by 100%. So, and in a relatively short period of time. So,
but in some sectors, I'm sorry to interrupt you. In some sectors, CO2 rise, like for example, production of plastic, for example, right? So it's not.
Oh yeah. Yes, that's right.
And Adam, let me just clarify one thing. We don't need to go there is a critical issue here, which is how to talk about the emissions. We don't need to go to zero emissions, so we don't need 100% cut. What we want is indeed what is called now climate neutrality. And climate neutrality is a balance between the carbon that we can take out of the atmosphere by different modes, you know, through technology, but mostly by forests, also by the oceans that, however, are suffering with the CO2 that it's actually taken by the oceans and suffering, for instance, acidification. So we don't need to go to zero, but in Portugal, for you to have an idea, we need to go from around 70 million tons to 10 million tons. That's what our forests in Portugal can actually sequester, can take out of the atmosphere. So, you know, it's going to be really hard, but maybe not as hard as, you know, going to 100%.
Okay, right. Thank you for the clarification. Yes, that's right. And I see that a question appeared here. So once again, I really encourage you to ask even more questions. And I think that maybe we can, make one round of some follow-up questions to things you already said, and then we could talk about something which appeared and will appear on the chat. So, Professor Harris, if I can, you've mentioned about those effects of rising sea level, like one of the effects of climate change will be a massive migration from coastal areas, and you, for instance, gave this example of Poland. But to be honest, I don't see that anyone cares, about that. I see that they are building a lot on the coasts because this is a nice place to build something, right? And so my question is, have any steps, been taken to raise awareness among people living on the coast? So maybe any, activists or groups work the people living on the coast to show them the threat and to prepare them for changes which are coming.
So thank you. Yeah, and I think this may go a little bit to one of the questions in the chat, is that, from my perspective, we definitely still need natural scientists to help document these impacts, but the social science is becoming increasingly critical in order to have people understand and relate to the information. So the way my brain works as a scientist is I love facts and I love information, and more facts and more information helps me to change my mind. But that is not the entirety of humanity. And in fact, many people having more information and more facts is not useful. Making sure that we talk with them in a very direct way that also enhances our listening of where they are and what they understand and what their experience is. It ends up being more about building trust and relationship. I find it interesting that in the United States, two of the best known people who work in this sphere are Ayanna Johnson and Katharine Hayhoe, and I can put some of their information in the chat in a little bit. And every culture is different, but Katharine Hayhoe is very effective. She's the wife of an evangelical preacher. So, in the United States, we have a strong tradition of evangelicism. And she has found tremendous progress in talking with what is traditionally a very conservative population in the United States, where some of the tropes of fake news and science doubting has gained foothold, by really practicing deep empathy and deep relationship building and deep listening with communities. And so I could have answered this in a very scientific way, but I think it's just as important to emphasize that part of what we're going to have to do is to mobilize not just with information and facts, which I love, I don't want to put those down, but also with building trust and faith in what we need to do as full communities to deal with the challenges. So I'll put those links just as FYI, knowing of course that the United States is not Poland, and I'm sure that you all have your own examples of climate heroes in Poland as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask then the next question, the next follow-up question to Professor Ferreira. And you've mentioned about sustainable development, and I'm curious about this. Can our choices support sustainable development, or it's just beyond the general public? Maybe it depends on policymakers only, and the best we can do is actually to vote for proper representatives which will make proper choices. Because what can we do, and can we something do in terms of sustainability?
Yes, definitely we can do something, and I think that the best opportunity for us is indeed the way that we select the things we buy. That has a huge influence, and also in terms of climate change. Like. Here in Portugal, I can go to the market or to the supermarket. And if I go to the market, I will get local products. If I go to the supermarket, I'll probably get a lot of products from abroad. And for instance, I can select kiwis from 100 kilometers from the place where I live in Portugal. Or I actually have in the supermarket, usually kiwis from Australia, actually from New Zealand. And that really makes a difference. The amount of plastic that I will have in the things that I buy, where do they come from? If I'm buying fruit that is from the season, or if it's out of season. And for instance, the amount of meat that we have. I'm not a vegetarian. I think we do not need to to take out all of the meat from our daily food. But I think for healthy reasons and for climate reasons, we can actually reduce that amount. So those are options that are not dependent on the government. There are a lot indeed. We cannot. I should say that I think that it really does not depend only on the individuals. We do need policies. We do need to choose the right politicians to actually engage the society, engage at both the national and international level for this fight to tackle climate change. But at the same time, we do have a huge responsibility, and it's very important for us to get all the information we can, scientifically based, to do our options.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, I think that's right. That someone can think that choices of a single person doesn't matter, but if you multiply it by a number of people on Earth, it gives a huge impact, right? And it sends a strong message to the market. For instance, if we start choosing, I don't know, maybe meat substitutes, it will be a strong signal for the market that it's demand for such solutions, and so on. So it's a matter of scale. And I have one more question to Professor Grodzińska-Jurczak, because you mentioned about science communication and scientific language, and I'm curious if the scientific language, and this question is actually connected with the one which I saw on the chat right here. So is the scientific language simple enough for the general public? Because to be honest, when even when I try to read scientific papers out of my field, and I work in the scientific realm, it's sometimes hard to understand what's going on. So I can imagine that for people which are not from the scientific world, it's even harder. So from their point of view, it can when they don't understand something, they conclude that it doesn't make any sense. Maybe it's some kind of hoax or something, right? And also it's somehow connected to pandemic and to your previous answer, because I also see quite loud groups of people, and they say that pandemic doesn't exist, they don't believe in vaccines, even though it's not about their beliefs, right? Because it's science, so it's true whether or not they believe in it. However, they say something like that. And I think that there's also a huge overlap of those groups. So, science, climate denial, pandemic denial, I don't know, maybe it's science denial. So what's the origin of that? And maybe we as scientists just failed.
Okay, if you don't mind, Adam, could you show a few slides? I sent you yesterday. Yeah, to make the long story short, I originate from a very, very academic family since 3 generations. So I'm not a good example probably of those who can criticize academic. However, yes, people speak different language than the scientists, or all the way around. Scientists do speak differently than the public, and some of us do not have an awareness of that. That's why I'm crazy about popularization. We do science due to make our life, let's say, better. However, I'm very fascinated, as I said, on any kind of bottom-up activism. And that's why when you look at the slide, David Suzuki, a well-known scientist actually, he was just curious, why aren't people paying more attention? There is enough evidence we are destroying the planet. Why aren't people out in the streets? Current generations, especially youth, is very much aware that we are destroying the planet. Moreover, you have a say, even according to the legislation, just one piece of legislation here in the EU, that actually this is a convention, we call it Aarhus Convention, from the name of the city it was signed. A convention on access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters, which means that we all have actually legislation which needs to provide us with information of the state of the environment. Next, please, Adam. So the government is the one who needs to do it for us. As like a kind of ideal situation to me would be engaging public into nature conservation. That's what our team does, that we try to get especially local people, local authorities, or various stakeholders from various sectors on decision-making, on debating, and then decision-making upon nature conservation. Because very often it happens that people at local level do know much more than us scientists about the nature. However, they do speak different language, but who cares? We, next please, Adam, we as academics should step down actually to other stakeholders. What we do with single-use plastic, just recently, we organized a series of workshops to different groups of stakeholders, which were we call it circular economy, but from the of plastic, single-use plastic, but from the social point of view. So we had on board producers, owners of restaurants, recyclers, but also just customers, consumers, and artists, local authorities, etc. And we all did discuss over how to create knowledge which would be reliable. That's what you, Adam, mentioned, reliable, and not fake news, but reliable based on science, but also from the practical science, applied science, those guys who do that plastic on everyday usage, and also the restaurants who do sell it, and also the authorities who sign the legislation for that. And next slide, please. And eventually, that's what this is actually not very common among at least at least biologists I originate from, but I do work a lot with social scientists, that academia definitely needs to be integrated within our society and outside. We are somehow, we are called sometimes ivory tower or gold cage or whatever. We cannot, there is a, if any of you is quite interested in the subject, please find a Google a book on I'm right and you're an idiot. This is about the language, a discourse on how to, let's say, integrate with academia. We have an almost, and this is a citation from that, we have an almost extreme situation where the very intelligent elites are sort of mumbling and bumbling and proceeding as if they were communicating when they are not. So it needs legislation to allow doing it, academic doing it, but also a kind, as Francisco said already, this we have to be activists. We have, in case of academia, we have to speak out, and we have to deal with other people who are somehow involved in pieces of science we are dealing with. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And unfortunately, it seems that we are almost out of time. That I know that Professor Ferreira has to go soon, so maybe you'd like to say something to our attendees, you know, some your final thoughts about this, about, you know, the meeting and everything.
You know, I actually, you know, comment one of the last the last questions in the chat, and in fact, a lot of people, you know, feel that we are basically 8 billion people in the world. What is my role? You know, am I going to make a difference? It's China and the United States that have to make a difference, not myself. It's company A, B, or C that really has to change, and that's, you know, we cannot think that way. We really need to believe that we do make a difference, at least locally. And of course, if everyone does it, it spreads around. So it's very important for us to monitor what the different companies do, and try to have our selection of purchasing goods from the ones we have better information on what they do concerning climate change. But my last message is basically the following. It's very important for everyone attending this discussion that get the best scientific information. We do, you know, it's in different countries there are different ways that the news are spread. We do have, you know, fake news, as you know. But it's important for us to evaluate our sources, to look at the effort that all the countries are doing at United Nations level, look at the papers that are being published in different fields, and make it urgent. We're actually in, you know, the Secretary General of the United Nations, who's a Portuguese, today he said in the Climate Leaders Summit that we are in a red alert. You know, again, that's the way we should look at it. We should understand that we really need to change our behaviors. Companies have to change their behaviors. Countries have to look ahead and protect the next generations. So let's get informed. Let's do the best we can do to tackle climate change. And I think that at least during this hour, we got, you know, different views, complementary views, that will help all of us to change.
Thank you. And Professor Harris, would you like to add something?
Well, I'll just say that, you know, overnight in the United States, we had a shift in the people in power who had the ability to change policy. And that came down to not, you know, to not a lot of votes in the way our electoral system works. And so, you know, I think the power of the individual comes not only from individual actions, but also in your voice, and in also speaking out in daily life, because some of the influence we have is in being willing to intervene and have difficult discussions with people who don't agree with us. And I think sometimes I have a teenager, a 13-year-old, and sometimes he does so much in the digital world that he gets shy to have those discussions. He worries that it's going to be conflict and argument. And it doesn't have to be that way if you practice really good listening, and if you practice respect for the other person, and if you feel confident in your own values and in your own self. And so I encourage you all to try to take those conversations, even if they seem small, where you find them in your families and communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Professor Grodzińska-Jurczak, please.
Okay, sorry, I'm just working Teams and I don't know how to raise the hand here. Well, that's what I teach students, that's what I teach everyone, sometimes even in the streets. This is not, this is everybody who has to change yourself. And it's hard, especially if your behavior is, let's say, somehow set. But definitely everybody has also a kind of obligation to teach the others. I know that youth sometimes, as Lora mentioned, can be well, shy, especially towards older people, and tell them, why don't you have a mask, for example, right? Or why don't you behave like this, not all the way around, friendly to the environment? Well, once or twice you would get some, let's say, not very nice wording from that person, but then I'm sure that eventually even the person you try to talk to will somehow re-evaluate, or at least think over what a young person tells, right? And really, sometimes I try to, let's say, kick people like on the tram or on the bus. What do they think about this and this? This is really needed. It is really needed, and my experience from all those activities at local level, sometimes in the middle of nowhere, like in the far southeast here in this country, in Poland, middle of nowhere, mountains around. When you talk to people, they start to understand, but not as a big scientist, not as a professor. I don't actually start my conversation that I'm from big university, etc. as a just normal, I don't know, a mother, a sister, whatever, right? So please try to talk to people, whatever age you are in and whatever education you've got, but you have to be based on reliable knowledge. That's what I'm sure about, that you have to double check all the information, especially in the era of fake news, right? Thank you very much.